The harsh smell of disinfectant flooded my nose as I pushed myself upright against the cold frame of the hospital bed. And 4 needle was still lodged in the back of my hand. On the wall, an electronic display showed the date clearly. Exactly 90 days remained before the global catastrophe. In my previous life, I died among the ruins during the 3rd year of the apocalypse. Snow buried my frozen limbs. With my last breath, I watched my younger sister, Sue Wan, board an armored transport at a survivor base with abundant supplies and a powerful system ability, leaving me to be slowly devoured amid the roars of a zombie horde. Only as I lay dying did I learn the truth. 3 days before the apocalypse, a mysterious system window had appeared in front of both Sue Wan and me. It offered 2 choices. The first was to bind a stable original storage system and receive a 500 cubic meter independent space. Time inside would pass at the same rate as outside, and there would be no negative consequences. The second was to consume the system's entire core and enlarge the storage limit by 100 times. In exchange, the flow of time inside would become unstable, and once every 7 days a random spatial collapse would occur, permanently erasing some of the stored supplies. In my previous life, Sue Wan touched the window first and chose the 100-fold expansion without hesitation. She mocked me for being timid and conservative, convinced that sheer size could overwhelm every crisis. But after the apocalypse began, collapse after collapse struck her space. Food, medicine, and fuel repeatedly vanished without warning. When she finally ran out of options, she targeted the supplies I had painstakingly gathered, tricked me into traveling with her, and eventually pushed me toward the zombies just to steal my last compressed biscuits. A violent knock interrupted my thoughts. The door opened, and Sue Wan entered carrying a bag of fruit. She wore the same sweet, innocent smile as always and hurried to my bedside. "Big sis, you're finally awake. The doctor said you fainted from staying up too late. You terrified me. The college entrance exam is only 3 months away. You can't keep studying yourself into the ground." I looked at her calmly, knowing this fainting spell had not been harmless. At this point in my previous life, I had collapsed from studying and been hospitalized. While I was unconscious, Sue Wan stole my bank card, took the savings our parents had left me, and used the money to buy her first batch of supplies. This time, I had prepared in advance. Before entering the hospital, I had moved most of the money into an anonymous account, leaving only a few hundred yuan on the card. Pretending to check my forehead, Sue Wan quietly searched beneath my pillow for my wallet. When she found nothing, disappointment flashed through her eyes before her gentle expression returned. "By the way, sis, Mom and Dad are going on a business trip next week. Why don't we plan some snacks in advance and order them together?" she asked cautiously, still trying to get me to pay for stockpiling. I nodded vaguely and brushed her off. As soon as she left, I called a real estate agent. My parents owned an unused detached house on the outskirts of the city. It was remote, had strong walls and an independent water source, and would make an excellent apocalypse base. In my previous life, Sue Wan had forgotten about it, and raiders eventually seized it. Using my parents' authorization, I secured a long-term lease at a low price, then contacted a construction crew to begin renovations 1 week later. The plan included reinforced exterior walls, blast-resistant steel doors and windows, an independent solar power system, and an underground water reservoir. Every contractor signed a confidentiality agreement. I paid only a deposit and stipulated that all work had to be completed 20 days before the apocalypse. After leaving the hospital, I went straight to a wholesale market. I did not buy food in obvious bulk. Instead, I purchased small quantities of vacuum-packed rice and flour and claimed I was preparing easy meals for exam season. I avoided the suppliers Sue Wan usually watched and quietly contacted 3 local fresh food distributors. All deliveries were scheduled for the middle of the night, 3 days before the apocalypse, and would go directly to the suburban house without using the main city roads. When I returned home that evening, Sue Wan was watching short videos in the living room. Every clip was about surviving the apocalypse. She turned excitedly when she saw me. "Sis, look, everyone online says you should stock supplies in case of a disaster. If the world really ended, we'd need a lot of things. I said nothing and locked myself in my bedroom. An asset list I had printed in advance lay inside my desk drawer. 90 days would pass quickly. Soo-won was still lost in fantasies about the future and had no idea that the system choice appearing several days later would become the greatest nightmare of her life. I would not wait helplessly for fate as I had before. My parents' flight departed on schedule, leaving only Soo-won and me at home. At 6 the next morning, I began reorganizing the storage areas. Because our parents had long been in business, the basement was large and normally filled with miscellaneous items. While Soo-won slept, I installed a temporary partition across half of it and secured my section with a private lock. At 8, she came downstairs and frowned at the barrier. "Sis, why did you divide the basement? Can't we keep everything together? I'm storing study materials and books. There will be a lot of them, so a separate section will be easier to organize." She clearly did not believe me. She paced around the partition and reached toward the lock. But I stopped her, pulling back with an aggrieved expression. She said, "We're sisters. Why are you guarding things from me? It will be crowded and disorganized. I don't want anyone rummaging through it." I refused to yield. In my previous life, I had shared the basement with her without reservation. On the first day of the apocalypse, she claimed every supply and threw me out. Over the next several days, I visited tool shops across the city. Fire blankets, medical suture kits, hemostatic agents, multipurpose entrenching tools, non-slip ropes, and water filtration equipment were bought in small batches and stored separately. I avoided attracting attention by never placing one enormous order. I registered several online shopping accounts and used staggered delivery addresses. Some packages went to the suburban house, while others were sent to temporary pickup stations. Soo-won noticed my unusual behavior. During dinner one evening, she put down her chopsticks. "Sis, you've been going out every day and buying strange tools. What are you doing?" "An outdoor club online is organizing a hiking trip. I'm preparing equipment." Her eyes shifted as she began probing into my finances. "Mom and Dad left us quite a lot of living money. Why don't we pool it and let me keep the accounts? It would be more efficient." I took a drink of water and refused directly. "We each manage our own money. Neither of us interferes with the other." Her face darkened, and she stopped pretending to be gentle. Late that night, I heard her sneak into my study and try to pry open the desk drawer in search of my bank card. A miniature camera I had installed recorded everything. I did not expose her immediately. I saved the footage as evidence for later. I contacted a used car dealer and bought a four-wheel drive off-road vehicle with a modified chassis at a low price. It was stored in the garage at the suburban house, reinforced with protective steel plates, fitted with additional storage, and prepared for an auxiliary fuel tank. I also visited local farmers and signed long-term supply agreements for frozen meat, vegetables, and seeds to be delivered shortly before the apocalypse. With 70 days remaining, Soo-won began obsessively reading stockpiling guides. She joined countless doomsday preparation groups on social media, chatted with strangers every day, and searched everywhere for cheap suppliers. She believed she had gained an advantage, unaware that I had already secured most reliable channels. The sellers still available to her were expensive, unreliable, and poorly stocked. She called our parents crying and demanded more money. They doted on their younger daughter and quickly transferred a large amount. She immediately began ordering. Snacks, simple tents, and disposable bottles of water soon filled the living room. I passed by while she eagerly sorted the packages. Raising her chin proudly, she said, "Look how much I've stored. If something dangerous really happens, we can last a long time. If you had prepared with me sooner, you wouldn't need to buy random things in small batches." I did not respond. Without a secure shelter, ordinary supplies would merely turn their owner into someone else's target. Soo-won focused entirely on quantity while ignoring defensive equipment, a safe base, and renewable resources. She waited eagerly for the system and imagined packing everything into a space enlarged 100 times, never considering the deadly price hidden behind that expansion. Renovations at the suburban house progressed steadily. The crew reinforced the ventilation ducts and installed anti-climb wire. I ordered solar storage batteries, sealed moisture-proof containers, and long-lasting stabilized fuel. As the countdown shortened, my refuge slowly took shape. 3 days before the apocalypse, the city's weather became abnormal. A heat wave had lasted half a month. News reports covered extreme weather across the country, and panic began spreading online. At midnight, pale blue translucent windows appeared without warning in front of both Sue Wan and me. Survival system binding candidates confirmed. Option 1. Bind the original stable spatial system. Receive a permanent 500 cubic meter independent space with no negative effects. Time flows at the same rate as the outside world. Supplies remain preserved forever. The space will never collapse. Option 2. Overdraw the system core and enlarge capacity 100-fold, creating a 50,000 cubic meter space. Cost. The spatial core will be damaged. Once every 7 days, a random collapse will occur, causing stored items to disappear unpredictably. The loss cannot be forecast or prevented. Only one candidate may complete each binding. The first person to confirm an option will receive that system. The instant the windows appeared, I selected the first option. A gentle force entered my body, and a stable, orderly storage space appeared within my consciousness. Its 500 cubic meters were perfectly clear to my senses. Once binding was complete, the window vanished from my sight. Across from me, Sue Wan stared at her floating interface with feverish excitement. 50,000 cubic meters could hold tens of thousands of tons of supplies. The temptation overwhelmed her judgment. She ignored the glaring warning beneath the option and immediately chose the second. The moment the selection completed, she gasped in delight. She closed her eyes and sensed the vast interior, her face glowing with triumph. Yet I clearly saw a thread of dark gray energy pass over her body, the hidden damage caused by overdrawing the system core. She opened her eyes and boasted eagerly. "Sis, I chose the 100-fold expansion. I have 50,000 cubic meters. No matter how many supplies I find, I can store all of them. What did you choose? Don't tell me you took that tiny 500 cubic meter space. That's nowhere near enough." "I chose the original stable space," I replied calmly. She scoffed. "You're always too conservative and afraid of risk. Bigger is better. So what if a few things disappear occasionally? I'll simply store several times more and make up the loss. When the apocalypse comes, you'll regret not taking the larger space." I did not argue. We had had the same conversation in my previous life. She could never understand how terrifying a spatial collapse was. Random erasure did not mean losing 1 or 2 items. At its worst, 90% of everything inside could vanish instantly. In a world without reliable resupply, one major collapse was enough to kill someone. Over the next 3 days, Sue Wan shopped frantically. She spent all her savings and filled the newly unlocked space with enormous quantities of goods. Snacks, bottled water, cheap bedding, and low-quality canned food poured inside. She deliberately avoided heavy construction materials, seeds, and medicine because she believed they wasted space that could hold more instant food. I transferred the supplies I had pre-ordered to the suburban house, placing some inside my stable space. Because it carried no risk, I prioritized medicine, seeds, tools, precious metals, and energy components. Large equipment, water, and grain were stored in the reinforced underground rooms. On the afternoon before the apocalypse, Sue Wan packed a bag and approached me excitedly. "Sis, let's leave together and find a shelter. My huge space is full of food. If we travel together, I can share some with you." Her words sounded generous, but calculation hid in her eyes. She wanted me beside her so that whenever a collapse destroyed her supplies, she could seize mine to fill the gap. "I'm not going. I already have a place prepared." Her smile stiffened, and pressure entered her voice. "Don't be stubborn. Surviving alone is too dangerous. Once the zombies appear, monsters will be everywhere. You won't last. Following me is your best chance. I have my own plans." Unable to persuade me, she turned away with a cold expression. She believed I was foolish and that I would soon beg for her help once disaster struck. Carrying her backpack, she left alone for a temporary gathering point arranged by people online. She intended to use her enormous storage ability to attract survivors and build a team around herself. In the early hours of that night, sirens screamed across the city. A large-scale viral outbreak began. The infected lost their reason and transformed into bloodthirsty zombies. Screams and crashes filled the streets. The apocalypse had arrived exactly on schedule. Cars collided outside as people shrieked. I locked every door and window, followed my planned route out of the city, and drove toward the suburban house. The reinforced off-road vehicle moved steadily through the chaos, avoiding groups of infected people. At the refuge, I sealed the blast-resistant gate and activated the perimeter surveillance system. More than a dozen screens showed every side of the property. High walls and wire barriers kept the danger outside. I inspected my inventory. Everything in the original space remained intact, and the underground storeroom was fully stocked. Meanwhile, Soo-won reached the online gathering point. When the dozen survivors there saw her produce supplies from empty air, they immediately crowded around her with praise. Enjoying the attention, she generously distributed canned food and water. The spectacle of her 50,000 cubic meter space briefly made her the center of the group. Everyone envied her enormous capacity. No one knew its deadly cost. On the morning of the 7th day, while Soo-won discussed another supply run, the first collapse struck without warning. Her face changed as she hurriedly checked the space. 2,000 cases of bottled water she had stored the previous day and more than half her canned food had vanished. Nearly 30% of everything she owned was permanently erased. She panicked but dared not reveal the truth. If the survivors learned that the supplies could disappear at random, they would abandon her immediately. She claimed that recent expeditions had consumed far more than expected and barely kept the group together. She hoped to gather enough new supplies to compensate for the loss. She led the team to search a supermarket, consuming more resources along the way. Only 3 days later, a second collapse occurred. This time, warm clothing and first aid medicine vanished in enormous quantities. Several members noticed that the inventory had inexplicably shrunk and began questioning her in private. Fear spread through the group. Several strong adults secretly discussed restraining Soo-won and taking control of her storage ability. Sensing the danger, she abandoned them under cover of darkness and fled alone. As she traveled and consumed supplies, she felt for the first time how much of a burden the gigantic space had become. During her escape, she thought of me, believing I might still be at our old home. She returned to the city to seize my stockpile. When she opened the door, the apartment was empty except for scattered junk. I was long gone. Standing in the silent living room, she cursed under her breath, remembering that I had chosen the stable 500 cubic meter space. She sneered. She still believed she could survive the collapses by continuously replacing whatever vanished. She did not understand that when she chose the hundredfold expansion, she had given up the only stable foundation for long-term survival. The original space would never lose a single item. Seeds, medicine, and precision components could be preserved indefinitely, and with proper planning, 500 cubic meters could sustain someone for years. Soo-won's space, by contrast, was a leaking barrel. No matter how much she poured into it, part of the contents would disappear at regular intervals. In the long run, even its enormous capacity could not withstand endless erasure. While wandering through the outskirts in search of supplies, Soo-won discovered the protective wire surrounding my renovated house. Her eyes lit up. She crept toward the wall and attempted to climb the fence. The surveillance cameras captured her clearly, and I activated the sound and light alarm along the top of the perimeter. Sirens shrieked, and powerful floodlights locked onto her. Blinded, she stumbled backward and shouted over the wall. "Su-ching, open the gate. I know you're inside. I can take you with me, and we can share supplies." From inside the property, I answered through the exterior speaker. "No need. You have a 50,000 cubic meter space. You don't need my help." Her voice grew urgent. "I've been losing a lot of supplies lately. Open the gate, and we can search together. My space is large enough to hold everything we find. Come back after you solve the collapse problem." She froze. She had never expected me to know the hidden price of her system. Panic stripped away her disguise, and her tone turned vicious. "You knew. If you knew the danger, Why didn't you warn me? Open the gate and give me half your supplies. Or I'll find a way to destroy your shelter. I cut the connection and ignored her shouting. Unwilling to give up, she paced outside for hours and searched for a weak point in the walls. The blast-resistant surface was smooth and solid, and every attempt failed. As darkness fell and zombies began gathering in the open countryside, she was forced to retreat. Hiding in her vehicle, Soo-won seethed. She still could not understand why the seemingly superior hundredfold space kept consuming its own inventory. She had not yet realized that she had sacrificed far more than storage capacity. She had abandoned her only reliable chance to survive. The disaster had barely begun. By the 22nd day, temperatures were falling steadily and an early cold wave had arrived. Searching outdoors became far more difficult, and clean water grew scarce. Soo-won's space suffered a third collapse. Nearly half the remaining supplies vanished, leaving only a small number of compressed biscuits. Desperate for resources, she entered an abandoned shopping district and found supplies in a convenience store. Just as she prepared to store them, 3 raiders armed with steel pipes and machetes stepped from an alley and blocked her escape. Traveling alone, are you? Their heavy-set leader said as he looked her over greedily. Hand over everything you have, and we'll let you leave. Soo-won summoned a fruit knife from her space and held it defensively. Stay back. I have plenty of supplies. If you force me, I won't cooperate. The instant they saw an object appear from nowhere, they understood that she possessed a storage ability. Their greed intensified. The 3 exchanged glances and rushed her together. Soo-won had no fighting experience. After a brief struggle, they tore away her backpack. She tried to summon heavier weapons, but only a few supplies remained inside the space, and she had stored no serious equipment. A steel pipe struck her arm, sending pain through her body. Before the raiders could seize her, zombie growls sounded in the distance. A large group had been attracted by the fight. The men grabbed her backpack and fled rather than remain. Clutching her injured arm, Soo-won escaped the horde and hid inside an abandoned office building. As she bandaged the wound, despair overwhelmed her. For the first time, she understood that a vast space was useless without reliable supplies and defensive strength. Again, she thought of my house. She was certain I had stockpiled enormous resources behind strong defenses. She tried calling me, but the communications network had collapsed and the call would not connect. She resolved to find the house again and force her way inside by any means necessary. 3 days later, she retraced the route and hid in the woods outside the property. She watched me drive through the gate on my way to collect vegetable seeds from a distant greenhouse. Seizing the opportunity, she moved to the side wall with a crowbar and tried to damage a ventilation duct. The blast-resistant steel was far thicker than she expected. The tool slipped repeatedly, and after half an hour she had produced only a few shallow scratches. The security system sent the abnormal footage to me while I was returning with the seeds. Rather than drive home immediately, I contacted a middle-aged couple who guarded a neighboring farm. After the outbreak, we had agreed not to interfere with one another. I offered them medicine in exchange for watching the outside of my wall. I approached slowly in the vehicle. When Soo-won saw it, she hid among the trees. Once I entered and the gate closed, she emerged again. The farming couple stepped out and blocked her path. This is a private shelter. Do not come any closer, the man warned, holding a hunting rifle. Soo-won tried to bribe them. Help me open the gate, and I'll give you a huge amount of food. I have an enormous storage space. My supplies are practically endless. No, we already have an agreement with the owner. Approach again, and we will not be polite. Unable to persuade them, she withdrew. Repeated failure pushed her toward more extreme ideas. She wandered through the outskirts, approaching scattered survivors and spreading rumors that my property contained an enormous stockpile. She hoped to lure others into attacking it. Within 5 days, 7 or 8 desperate survivors gathered in the woods. Following her plan, they prepared to assault the shelter after dark. Soo-won believed a coordinated attack would eventually break the defenses. She intended to remain behind the group and seize the rewards once both sides had exhausted themselves. At nightfall, the survivors advanced with improvised tools. All believed I was alone and felt confident. They did not know that warning traps covered the perimeter and that the property contained a complete defensive system. Using the trees for cover, they crept toward the walls while Soo-won watched from bushes on a distant slope. The first two reached the fence and tried to pry apart a joint. The triggered alarm sounded instantly. Blinding searchlights illuminated every intruder, and the high-voltage grid came alive with a faint blue glow. Their leader tested it with a metal pole. The current hurled him to the ground, his body convulsing. The others retreated in fear. It's electrified. The fence is wired. Uncertainty spread, and some wanted to leave. Seeing the attack falter, Soo-won stepped from the bushes and shouted, "Don't retreat. The power supply can't last forever. Keep at it until the batteries run out, and then we can enter. There is enough food inside for all of us." Driven by desperation, the survivors began throwing rocks at the cameras. I watched them calmly from the control room and contacted the neighboring couple by radio, asking them to guard the side road against anyone attempting to flank the property. Then I activated the exterior speakers. "Leave immediately, and I will not pursue you. Continue attacking this shelter, and I will use defensive force. The supplies inside are private property. Attempting to seize them during the apocalypse is no different from initiating a deadly attack. Enough talk. Hand over the supplies, and we'll go," someone shouted as rocks struck the reinforced gate. Soo-won continued inciting them. "She's alone. She can't hold out for long. Ram the gate together." They pushed a thick tree trunk forward and used it as a battering ram. The steel gate vibrated slightly but did not deform. After 20 minutes, the trunk began splitting while the attackers' strength faded. At that moment, Soo-won's space collapsed again. Her consciousness shook violently. When she checked the interior, nearly half her remaining food had disappeared. The shock broke her focus, and her shouting faltered. The others noticed and looked at her suspiciously. One asked, "Didn't you say you had plenty of supplies? If we take this place, can we at least use yours first?" Flustered, she answered vaguely, "It's not convenient to retrieve them right now. Get inside first, and we'll discuss it later." The evasive reply made the survivors question whether she had been deceiving them all along. I used their hesitation. "I can release a small amount of drinking water and compressed food. Take it and leave. No one may continue attacking the wall." I opened a small delivery hatch and placed supplies in the clearing beyond the fence. Several people stared at the food. Two younger survivors stepped forward first, took the packages, and refused to risk further violence. More than half the group dispersed. Only 3 still wanted to attack. Soo-won tried desperately to stop the others from leaving, but they took the food and scattered. With the remaining 3, she moved behind the property and attempted to dig beneath the foundation. Reinforced concrete extended deep below the wall, making progress painfully slow. Dawn began to brighten the sky. Zombie growls came from the distance as infected people, attracted by a night of noise, converged on the area. The 3 survivors panicked, dropped their tools, and fled. Left without support, Soo-won ran after them. The assault ended in complete failure. Back in an abandoned building, Soo-won stared at the mostly empty space and finally admitted that the 100-fold expansion was a bottomless pit. Even so, she still refused to abandon the idea of taking my stable supplies. She believed that if she could seize my stockpile, she could survive each future collapse. From the top of the wall, I watched the attackers disappear. This conflict was only the beginning. Once Soo-won became desperate enough, she would devise something even more extreme. I had the defenses inspected, replaced damaged cameras, reinforced the underground storeroom, and prepared for another attack. On the 45th day, the authorities established a large survivor base in the distant urban district. Broken radio broadcasts reached the outskirts, instructing survivors to register there. The base offered basic water and shelter. Soo-won left immediately. She hoped her 50,000 cubic meter space would earn her status and a stable supply line. At the entrance, administrators recorded every survivor's information and checked for dangerous items. She deliberately demonstrated her ability by producing supplies in public. A mid-level manager noticed and welcomed her warmly, promising a private room if she joined outside search teams and stored the resources they collected. Soo-won was delighted. She believed she had finally found security. She accompanied the teams and stored their discoveries. But the collapses still arrived on schedule. During one expedition, a collapse erased most of the medicine and fuel they had just gathered. When the team counted the supplies, the numbers were far below what they expected. Members accused her of hiding part of the haul. The manager questioned her, but she did not dare reveal the truth. Her repeated denials only deepened suspicion. Resources inside the base were scarce, and conflict over distribution intensified. Someone secretly reported that Su-won was stealing mission supplies. Rumors spread. The management restricted her travel privileges and stopped assigning her to important teams. Her position deteriorated rapidly. She then overheard senior officials discussing research into survivors with spatial abilities. If they confirmed that her power was unusual, she feared they might detain her for forced experiments. Terrified, she fled the base under cover of darkness. Once outside, she returned to the same conclusion. Only my refuge and stable stockpile could keep her alive. Knowing she could not break through alone, she decided to return to the survivor base, spread even larger rumors, and organize a mass assault. A week later, she re-entered the base and exaggerated the value of my property. She claimed it had a complete energy system, enormous amounts of medicine and grain, and enough resources to sustain more than 100 people. Over 20 desperate survivors agreed to follow her. Learning from the previous failure, Su-won gathered fuel and planned to burn through the main gate. The group marched toward the outskirts. A small zombie horde attacked them along the way, causing casualties and weakening morale. She used her last food to keep the survivors from turning back. A survivor I met during a supply run warned me that Su-won was bringing a large group. I activated every defense plan, reinforced the gate, checked the batteries for the electric fence, cleared brush and other flammable material from the walls, and agreed with the neighboring farm that we would support one another in any large-scale conflict. 2 kilometers from the house, Su-won stopped the group to rest and promised that all supplies would be divided equally after the refuge fell. They cheered, imagining a secure place to live. None knew that her own inventory could disappear at any moment and that she was merely using them to open my gate. From the wall, I saw the group appear on the horizon. Rather than wait passively, I opened the supply delivery channel and prepared the public address system. Most of the people approaching had been deceived by rumors. Only Su-won and a handful of others were committed to robbery. More than 20 survivors assembled outside. Su-won raised a megaphone. Su-ching, open the gate and surrender the supplies. You can't resist this many people. Cooperate, and you may still receive a share. Fight us, and you'll meet a miserable end. The crowd shouted and waved weapons. Several pushed a metal barrel filled with fuel. Standing on the raised platform, I answered through the loudspeaker. Everyone, calm down and listen. She has deceived you. Su-won interrupted immediately. Don't listen to her. She's stalling. Break down the gate now. Whether I'm lying will become clear if you let me explain, I said. Su-won possesses a huge storage space and has probably told you it can hold limitless supplies. What she never mentioned is that once every 7 days, her space randomly collapses and makes its contents disappear. The crowd stirred, and many turned toward her. Her face went pale. That's a fabrication. She's jealous of my ability and is trying to divide us. You know whether it's true. On the 7th day, your first collapse destroyed 30% of your water. On the 22nd day, another erased more than half your food. During a recent mission, supplies vanished from the base team as well. Everyone involved remembers it. Several survivors who had traveled with her exchanged startled looks. They remembered the inexplicable shortages. And suspicion grew. She did not recruit you to share my supplies. I continued. Her space keeps losing whatever she stores. She wants my stable reserves to replace what disappears. If the gate falls and she takes control, she will never honor her promise to divide anything. Arguments broke out among the crowd. Some survivors refused to continue the assault. Su-won panicked and threw her remaining cans toward them. Don't believe her lies. I'll distribute supplies right now. She reached into her space, but a new collapse struck at that exact moment. Most of the food still inside was erased. No matter how hard she tried, She could summon only a few cans. Everyone stared. You said you had a huge stockpile. Why is that all you have? So she was telling the truth. Your supplies really disappear. Questions crashed over Su Wan from every direction. She stammered incoherent denials. But no one believed her. The united group split apart, and half the survivors stepped back from the wall. Several level-headed people called up to me. We don't want to steal anything. We only need somewhere safer to stay. Would you take in some of us? You may build temporary shelters in the outer area and share the water source if you obey my rules. Do not steal. And do not damage any facility. No one is permitted inside the inner wall. More than a dozen survivors lowered their weapons and moved to the open ground outside to wait. 6. Still consumed by greed, remained beside Su Wan. Seeing her force collapse, she ordered them to push the fuel barrel toward the gate. I activated the high-voltage grid and ignited a fire-resistant isolation strip that had been prepared outside the wall. The barrel could not cross the protected zone. Su Wan tried to circle around, but the neighboring farming couple appeared with rifles and blocked the side road. The outcome was obvious. Her remaining followers threw down their weapons and left. In moments, Su Wan stood alone before the wall, and everyone understood how she had used them. She glared up at me and screamed, "Why? You only have a tiny 500 cubic meter space. Yet you live safely. I have 50,000 cubic meters. Why do I keep losing everything? If you had chosen the 100-fold space, you would be exactly like me. The choices were offered to both of us. You ignored the clearly stated cost and selected the larger capacity yourself. You abandoned stability for something impressive only on the surface. The consequences belong to you." Unable to answer, she collapsed onto the ground. Zombies attracted by the continued noise were approaching in layers. The survivors in the clearing formed small groups and moved away from her. In the apocalypse, once she lost everyone's trust, the road ahead would only grow harder. After the failed siege, no survivor wanted to travel with Su Wan. Everyone feared that her disappearing inventory would eventually drag the entire group into disaster. She wandered alone, surviving on the remnants in her space. 2 more major collapses emptied it almost completely. Without food or medicine, and with the cold steadily weakening her body, she developed a severe fever. Out of options, she dragged herself back to the wall of my refuge. At dawn, the cameras found her curled beside the fence. Her face was pale, her lips cracked, and she carried no weapon. She looked close to death. I activated the speaker. "What do you want now?" She raised her head with difficulty. "Sis, I surrender. I know I was wrong. Please let me in. I won't fight over supplies anymore. I can work, repair the wall, tend the greenhouse. Anything. I only need a place to stay and enough food to survive. How can you prove you will not plot against me again? There's almost nothing left in my space. The collapses keep coming, and I can't hold on much longer. I only want to live. I won't try to steal from you again." I did not open the gate immediately. To enter the outer residential zone, you must accept restrictions. Every item you carry will be inspected. You will work each day in exchange for food. Theft or damage to any facility means immediate expulsion. You may never enter the inner wall. She agreed without hesitation. I opened the side gate and allowed her into the temporary outer area. I gave her medicine and warm porridge and assigned her a simple wooden cabin. During the first few days, she behaved well, clearing weeds and repairing damaged wire. I continued watching every movement. Miniature cameras covered the outer grounds without blind spots. Half a month passed. Her health recovered, and she continued working diligently on the surface. But her obsession had never faded. She quietly studied the layout, recorded possible weaknesses, and tried to determine where I stored supplies. One night, the cameras caught her near the outer wall drawing a map of the grounds. She had never abandoned the idea of entering the inner area and stealing the stable stockpile. I did not confront her. I waited for her to act. Several days later, a large zombie tide began moving through the outskirts. Continuous growls rolled across the distance as infected people surged toward the property. Su Wan saw an opportunity. She planned to use the attack as cover, pry open a storeroom, steal supplies, and flee. As the horde reached the wall, Every defense system activated. The electric grid ran continuously, and incendiary devices prevented zombies from climbing. I led the cooperative survivors in defending the perimeter, where the pressure was intense. While everyone focused on the horde, Soo-won retrieved a crowbar she had hidden and rushed to a temporary supply shed. The moment she forced the door, an alarm sounded. A searchlight locked onto her, exposing every part of her plan. I set down my defensive equipment and walked over. She stood holding a sack of grain, panic on her face. "I thought you were truly willing to live here peacefully." She dropped the crowbar. "There are too many zombies. I only wanted extra food to protect myself." "You drew a map and hid tools inside the wall of your cabin. You prepared this for days." The zombie tide was only an excuse. I held up the stored surveillance footage. With the evidence before her, she lost control. "Why should you have a stable space and a safe shelter while I lose everything? My space is larger than yours. It isn't fair." The interface displayed the cost in plain language. "You voluntarily chose to overdraw the system core. No one forced you. You rejected the stable path. So you must bear the price." Zombies were still attacking the perimeter, and I had no time for more debate. Under the rules, anyone who stole or sabotaged the refuge had to be expelled. I opened the outer gate, forced Soo-won outside, and sealed the passage. The horde was drawing closer. She looked from the massive wall to the approaching infected and pounded on the gate, crying and begging. I returned to the defense line and continued directing the others. I could offer one chance out of compassion, but I would not keep surrendering to endless greed. The zombie tide attacked through the entire night. At dawn, the infected gradually dispersed. Several parts of the wall were damaged, and the survivors worked together to repair them. Calm returned to the outer settlement. No one mentioned Soo-won. Everyone understood that attempting to steal supplies carried consequences. From the top of the wall, I searched the distance but could no longer see her. Later, survivors returning from supply runs brought news. After being expelled, she had escaped into an abandoned apartment building. She possessed only a small amount of food. When the next collapse arrived, even that disappeared. Starving, she ventured outside to search for something to eat and encountered a small zombie group. She attempted to summon a weapon, but repeated overdrawing had caused her ability to deteriorate. The amount she could store had fallen steadily, and the space could no longer hold large quantities. In the end, she failed to escape the infected. When I heard the news, I was tending vegetable seedlings in the greenhouse. Seeds, medicine, and mechanical components remained perfectly preserved inside my original stable space. The solar system powered the property reliably. The underground reservoir held ample water, and everyone worked according to an orderly division of labor, farming, repairing, and standing guard. A stable community had formed. Before the apocalypse, Soo-won had been obsessed with impressive numbers. She pursued a 50,000 cubic meter space because she believed greater capacity automatically meant a greater chance of survival. She thought she had seized the best opportunity while deliberately ignoring the fatal flaw hidden behind its attractive appearance. She wanted limitless storage but refused to accept the cost of repeated collapse. I chose the original 500 cubic meter space. Its capacity was limited, but it was permanently secure. Instead of chasing surface grandeur, I built a defensible shelter and planned renewable resources for long-term survival. Safety did not come from piling up an absurd quantity of goods. Stability and control were the true foundations of survival. Soo-won had mocked me for being conservative and cowardly. Only at the end did she understand that when she made her choice, she had abandoned not merely a stable ability but every realistic possibility of a secure life. Her enormous space was an enticing trap. It appeared capable of containing everything while steadily consuming its owner's reserves and hope. Survivors who later reached the house often reflected on our story. I told them that the apparent size of a special advantage was never the decisive factor. Understanding the cost behind a choice, restraining greed, and planning for the long term mattered far more than chasing an ability that looked overwhelmingly powerful in the moment. Winter slowly receded, and temperatures rose. I led the community in cultivating unused land inside the walls and expanding the growing area. The stable space held harvested seeds and surplus grain as emergency reserves. Zombies still roared among the distant ruins, and danger had never disappeared completely. But I had a secure refuge and dependable companions. I would not die alone in the ruins as I had in my previous life. I had seized the opportunity rebirth gave me. Su Wan's fate remained a warning to everyone. Never allow a dazzling temptation to blind you. Every gift that appears to demand nothing has a price already attached, one that may be impossible to pay. By the final moment of her life, she probably understood what she had given up when the system window appeared. That realization came too late. In the apocalypse, there was no third chance.